Hey, everybody. Good morning. It's great to see you here. And if you don't know me, I'm Barry. I am one of the ministers here at the church. If you're a guest, it's great to have you with us. I want to reiterate what Mark was talking about when he was talking about Life Track. We would love for that to be your next step. If you've come and you like it, we'd encourage you to try Life Track. If you're joining us online, it's great to have you with us as well today. Have you ever said, this is great. Have you ever said, well, I'm never going to do that again? Have you ever found yourself saying that? You probably have. I think all of us have said it at one time or another. There was this great idea that didn't turn out so great. You know what that's like? So when I moved here to Tennessee, I had a bunch of books. I've collected books because of being a minister and having a library and all that kind of stuff. And I have a lot of books, like several hundred books. And when I came here, it's like, I don't know if I didn't need them every day, and I don't need them every day either, but it's kind of like, you walk in my office before and be like, look at my library, but I don't need all those books, and there's some I haven't read. And like I said, I've got commentaries about the Bible. I've got biographies. I've got books about finance and marriage and student ministry and all kinds of things. I even have a book in my library called Tennessee Football, The Glory Years. It was written a long time ago. I'm just kidding. I don't have that book. But if there was a book like that, all the words on the page would be gone because they'd have faded away because it had been so long ago. I know, that's brutal. Oh, rough crowd. Vanderbilt fans, huh? Tennessee and Vanderbilt fans in the room? No, just kidding. So anyway, I got all these books. It's like, I don't need these books. So what would be a really good idea is there's a place in Nashville that buys used books. And I called them and I asked them how it all worked. And they said, well, with a large order, and a lot of pastors do this, you bring them in, you leave them here for about 3 or 4 weeks. We go through, we price them, and then we just send you a check. And that's it. I mean, there's no negotiation or anything. That's the way it works. And I said, well, that's probably worth it. So I laid all the books out in the garage. I separate them by, this is this section, that section. I pulled out about 40 or 50 that I wanted. And I'd gone to the store like Lowe's and bought some medium-sized boxes to transport them in and filled up the boxes, all 8 of them with books. Got up on a Saturday morning, drove 40 miles to Nashville, which means it's an 80-mile round trip. You guys see where this is going. And it was an 80-mile round trip. I take the books in. You've seen the post office carts, like the big white carts that they push around in the post office, that are about like this, that are filled with stuff. I just about fill one of those things up with books. I hand them off, and she said, well, Mr. Clark, give us about 3 or 4 weeks, and then we'll send you a check. Now, listen, folks, I wasn't planning on getting enough money from these books that I'd be able to take my family to a 7-day cruise to the Greek islands. I wasn't planning on that. But in my mind, I thought, I don't know, $150? Would you like to guess how much I got for my books? Would you like to guess? I have the check right here. I did cash it. I marked out the names to protect the innocent, but it says, paid to the order of Baron Thomas Clark, 'cause that's my real name, $35.84. Did I tell you that I spent $10 on boxes and drove 80 miles round trip? It would have been better if I'd have just thrown them in the trash. It's like, husbands, when your wife says, this is a classic, well, honey, you got to spend money to save money? And you go, that makes no sense. This was one of those kind of things where when it was all over, I said, that made no sense. That made no sense. Well, I never will do that again. You've said it too, right? There's things you've tried. There's efforts you've given. There's these things you've attempted. And you get to the end of it and you go, well, I'll never do that again. Or you prayed. You trusted God. You went out on what you thought was a limb. And you got burned. Or God didn't answer your prayer the way you wanted, and you felt like God didn't really care. And at that moment, when you got through all that, you look back on that moment and you said what? Well, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to put my faith in God like that again. We've been in this message series called I Do Believe, Help Me with My Unbelief. And there is this tension between doubt and belief that goes on inside of our souls. like inside of our hearts and minds. I do believe. Help me with my unbelief. There's this tension. And we've talked about this very honestly, very sincerely. Having doubts is very natural. Last week, Andy highlighted some of the people in the Bible who had doubts, and they're very important people in the Bible who expressed concerns and doubts, and there were things going on in their mind that they didn't understand. But at the same time, while we've talked about the importance of understanding that doubts are quite normal, we've also encouraged people to lean into faith, to lean into belief, to lean into trusting God. That's what we've encouraged you to do. And today what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at this great story in the Bible. It's like when you think of Bible stories, this is one of the best. It's about three young men who find themselves like fish out of water kind of story. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And if you grew up in church, you know that that's the order you have to say their names. You always have to say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's never Abednego, Shadrach, Meshach. You can't do that. That's illegal if you're a Christian. You have to say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They find themselves in this unusual position. And here's what we discover when we look at their story. God can be trusted. God can be trusted. And that moment when we needed God the most is when he showed up most clearly. God can be trusted. And at that moment we needed him the most is when he showed up most clearly. Our verses today, I'm going to be using the translation of the Bible called the Message. It's not the version we have in the chair underneath the seat. It's not the Bible in the chair underneath the seat. That's the NIV. Maybe you have the NIV with you if you have a physical one. If you want to follow along on your phone and you use the YouVersion app on your phone, you can follow it along there. But the word's going to be up on the screen. We're going to be looking at this passage together. There's such a great story. We're going to begin by Daniel 3, starting with verse 1. And it starts out with this king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. He built a gold statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet thick. He set it up on the Dura plain in the province of Babylon. And then he ordered all the important leaders in the province, everyone who was anybody, to the dedication ceremony of the statue. They all came for the dedication, all the important people, and took their places before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had erected. You know, arrogance causes people to do some pretty interesting and unusual things, doesn't it? Well, Nebuchadnezzar is king of Babylon. He becomes king of Babylon about 600 BC, 600 years before the birth of Christ, which is going to come into play later on in the story, so that's important you know that. So he becomes king of Babylon 600 years before the birth of Christ, and he's the kind of king who's very powerful. Like any nation, any other king stands up before him, they crush him. I mean, they crush him hard. And so he's very powerful. He did a lot of great things in Babylon, like the palace was wonderful, the city was great. If you've ever heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, most people believe that Nebuchadnezzar was the king who built them. But Nebuchadnezzar plays a major role in the Bible because he also, during his reign, he moves his armies into that area where, so Israel, the Jewish people were once one nation, and by this time they're two. They're fractured. You have a northern kingdom, which was called Israel, and they were less faithful to God than the southern kingdom called Judah. And if you understand Bible geography, Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom. So the northern kingdom, they're out of it by now. But Nebuchadnezzar goes into the southern kingdom and conquers it. And he is pretty ruthless with the king. Zedekiah is the king of Judah at this time. Zedekiah had sons. And what Nebuchadnezzar did was he had Zedekiah stand, and he had the sons of Zedekiah brought out before him, and then he murdered and killed the sons of Zedekiah right before Zedekiah's eyes. And then as soon as he did that, he had Zedekiah's eyes gouged out. So the lasting, final image of sight that Zedekiah ever has is that of his sons being killed. When a guy like Nebuchadnezzar tells you to do something, you do it or pay the penalty. Nebuchadnezzar builds a 90-foot high statue on the plains of Dura. It's about 9 feet wide. It's made out of wood. It's overlaid with gold. And you think about a plane like something flat, and you could see it from miles away. It was an impressive sight. And then he tells all the important people, you got to come out for the dedication ceremony, and they all show up. And right before the ceremony begins, it uses this unusual phrase, they all took their place. They all took their place. In other words, they were expected by Nebuchadnezzar to do what he wanted them to do. You sit here, you stand there, you do this, you do that. They were expected, and they all fell in line. They took their place. When the most powerful man on earth tells you what to do, you do it, right? What choice do you have? They took their place. But when those moments come, people, when those moments come, we all have a choice. And what we're going to choose to do is based upon what or who we believe in. Would you agree with that? When you're given a choice, you're going to base what you do based upon what or who you believe in. That's how you determine your place. Not what other people say, but by what you choose. And you have a choice. Nobody else can choose for you your place. People might say, do this, do that, go here, go there, stand or sit, but you have a choice. And what you choose to do is based upon who or what you believe in. People are going to try to teach you your place. People are going to try to inspire you to take a place. They're going to try to influence you to take your place, but you get to choose. And society says, this is the way you're supposed to act. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to say. But God says, don't just fall in line with the world. I mean, you can do that. It's your choice. God says, there's another choice. Don't fall in line with the ways of this world. But you get to choose, and nobody can choose for you. And whether we realize it or not, we are all taking our place. But you get to choose what that place is. We all have a choice. We are choosing whether to follow the ways of the world or follow the ways of Jesus. We can't do both. Verses 4 through 6. A herald then proclaimed in a loud voice, "Attention, everyone! Every race, color, and creed, listen. When you hear the band strike up, all the trumpets and trombones, the tubas and baritones, the drums and the cymbals, fall to your knees and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Anyone who does not kneel and worship shall be thrown immediately into a roaring furnace." So evidently they made this gold statue and a furnace right next to it. And that doesn't seem to be much of a choice, does it? Well, verse 7, the band started to play, and everyone, every race, color, and creed, fell to their knees and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Like they were expected, everyone took their place. America has been changing ever since its beginning. But in 1776, when our founding forefathers declared our nation's independence from Britain, they weren't just declaring independence, they were also declaring dependence upon God. I want you to always remember that. Independence Day means independence from Britain, but it also meant we're going to show our dependence on God. Our founding fathers, predominantly, were Christians. And the principles, the guidelines, the laws we have, the laws that they originally set up, all the founding fathers' documents were pointed toward this idea of this is a Christian nation. I don't know if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is one of my favorite cities to visit. I love going to Washington. There's so much rich history there. It's amazing seeing the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, to go see all the memorials. If you've never gone, please go sometime. It's a wonderful trip. But I think most of us are familiar with Washington. In the center of the mall, there's a Washington Monument. And it's the highest building in Washington, D.C. And at the very top of the Washington Monument, there's a small cap at the very top. Did you realize this? A small cap. And there's words written in Latin on that cap. There's only two of them. And those words are these: Laus Deo. Laus Deo, which translates into English as praise be to God. Praise be to God for this nation. Praise be to God for what you are doing. They were declaring their dependence upon God, even though that was built many years later after 1776. For many years, America has been a Christian nation, but I think if we were honest, we would honestly say America really isn't a Christian nation anymore. Seems like we're pretty divided, and there's a number of people who still love the Lord and want to see great things of our nation and still are faithful to those things, to those beliefs, but we know that there's a huge segment of society that is not. And in my lifetime, it's changed, and in your lifetime, it's changed, and it keeps changing and evolving. But while we were once a Christian nation, I think if we said right now what it was like, I think we'd say it's kind of more like Babylon. Like we have all these people that want to be worshiped, who say, look at me, follow me. Entertainers, movie stars, social influencers, politicians. It's like, look at me, look at what I've done, follow me. But here's the fact, here's the truth of the matter. We get to choose. We have a choice. What is our place in this culture? In Daniel 3, verses 8 through 12, we see not everyone did what they were expected to do. Here's why. When King Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, the Babylonians took the best and brightest young men from Jerusalem, and they brought them to Babylon to be servants in the court of the king. Let's put these smart people to work. So they brought them to Babylon. They kept them as slaves or servants, but they had positions of authority and influence. But they don't have a choice. They were brought from Jerusalem to Babylon. And there were a lot of great advantages to that. They were given opportunities and privileges that few people had, even as servants of Nebuchadnezzar. But when the big band started playing, not everyone bowed down. Not everyone got down on their knees, including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They stood out. And what we see is that these like court officials or the officials of Nebuchadnezzar said, hey, king, didn't you say that when the big band started playing that everybody had to bow and start worshiping the statue? Because we've got a problem. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not bowing down. They're standing. And they're pretty important, don't you think? Don't you think they have pretty important positions in your court? We need to do something about that. When you don't bow, when everyone else does, you stand out. When everyone else bows and you don't, you stand out. When you don't bow to the philosophies of this world, you stand out. When you don't bow down to the ways of this world, when you don't worship the things that our culture worships, and clearly there are things that our culture worships, when you don't worship those things, you're going to stand out. And Nebuchadnezzar is furious. And he orders that those young guys be brought before him, and he says, is it true that you don't respect my gods and refuse to worship the gold statue that I've set up? I'm giving you a second chance. But from now on, when the big band strikes up, you must go to your knees and worship the statue I've made. And if you don't worship it, you will be pitched into a roaring furnace. No questions asked. And then he asks this, who is the God who's going to rescue you from my power? Now, we kind of snicker at that. But Nebuchadnezzar really didn't think there was anyone more powerful than him. I really believe that one of the reasons why we have doubt is because something happened to create doubt that God could be trusted. It's like something happened and God didn't seem to care. Or you really did try to put your faith, but God did not answer or come through the way you had hoped. You did what you were supposed to do, but God didn't do what he was supposed to do. You know what doubt is? It's really simple. Doubt is not trusting God. Doubt is not believing in God. And I think we're all faced with a question. So if you don't believe, who are you going to trust to rescue you? Your own thinking? Are we going to trust our own thoughts, our own ideas? Who's going to save us from everything we're experiencing? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond, This is bold. You're going to love this. Your threat means nothing to us. If you throw us in the fire, the God we serve can rescue us from your roaring furnace and anything else you might cook up, O king. All of us have a choice. You have a choice. Now, you may not get to choose the consequences of your choice, but you have a choice. Am I going to doubt God or am I going to believe in God? And I want you to notice three things about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. One thing is this: they were young. They were young. We don't know exactly how old they were, but they were young men. And if you're a teenager or you're in your 20s or you're in your 30s, you are not too young to have a deep faith. You are not too young to have a strong faith. You're not too young to stand up when everybody else is bowing before and worshiping other things. Another thing I want you to notice about these three guys is it's great to have good friends. They weren't in this alone. They had one another to encourage them. Christianity is a team sport. It's like we need one another. I need you. You need me. We need each other to get through this. We need people to encourage us when times get hard. You're not meant to be in it alone. But there's this other thing I want you to notice as well. What allowed them to get to this point where their faith was so deep? They had suffered. They had suffered. You don't become a young person with that deep of faith, facing death, standing up against the most powerful man on the earth, just randomly. Something gets you there. They had suffered. They had been eyewitnesses of Nebuchadnezzar coming into their home country and them trying to defend their nation, but friends and brothers or uncles or fathers were killed and houses were destroyed, and Nebuchadnezzar tore down the temple that they had worshiped in, that had been built to the glory of God, and they had been yanked from their freedom in their home country and dragged away into a new country where they were servants of a king who believed that he was the God. They had suffered terribly. They had seen so much, and yet their faith was strong. They still believed. And even if the outcome wasn't what they would have wanted, they weren't going to give in. Why? Because they had been through so much, and yet God had been so faithful. If you throw us in the fire, the God we serve can rescue us from your roaring furnace and anything else you might cook up, O king. But even if he doesn't, it wouldn't make a bit of difference, O king. We still wouldn't serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Even if he doesn't save me from the fire. Even if he doesn't save me from this disease. Even if he doesn't save me from this spot I'm in. Even if he doesn't get me through these financial times of turmoil the way I would hope he would. Even if he doesn't, I'm not going to give up on him. That's the kind of faith that you just don't get to. Really? I mean, understand that. You just don't get there. Even if he doesn't, even if I have to die in that furnace, I'm not going to quit on him. That takes some stuff to get you to that point. Somebody came up to me after the first service, and such a great point. Deep suffering leads to deep faith. It's very true, isn't it? They didn't just arrive there, they got there. Even if he doesn't, we're never going to give in. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is furious. He says, okay, heat the fire 7 times hotter than normal. Let's crank that baby up. Let's get that furnace really hot. And they bind up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they pick out these strong men who are going to throw them in the fire. Well, maybe they opened the doors or whatever, however they did it. But when they opened the doors of the furnace, it was so hot, the heat killed the strong men who were going to throw them in. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I just kind of have this image of just kind of falling in, And then verses 24 through 26 says, suddenly King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm and said, didn't we throw 3 men bound hand and foot into the fire? That's right, O king, they said. But look, he said, I see 4 men walking around freely in the fire, completely unharmed. And the 4th man looks like a son of the gods. The king is confused. Arrogant and proud people are usually confused when God is doing some pretty amazing things. He looks in the furnace. He expects to see the 3 agitators burning to a crisp. Inside, he looks in, and there are 4 men, and they're all walking around. And Nebuchadnezzar said, the 4th one looks like the son of the gods. Most scholars believe that the 4th person in the furnace was Jesus. 600 years before his birth, that Jesus showed up. This happens occasionally in the Old Testament, not very often, but Jesus shows up here and is in the furnace with them. And it raises the question, why does Jesus show up now? Well, author and speaker Dr. Ray Pritchard says, Jesus never manifests himself except inside the furnace at that very moment when they most needed to see him. At that very moment when they most needed to see him. When everything's messy, Jesus is going to show up exactly at that moment when you most need to see him. He's going to be already there, but sometimes it's like perspective. There's this clarity you receive when you remain faithful and you begin to see Jesus. Even though he's never left you, you begin to see him at work at just the right time, at just the right moment. And Nebuchadnezzar goes to the door of the roaring furnace. I think he's like calling, he's like trying to get close, but not too close. And he doesn't say to somebody else, hey, go call him out. Nebuchadnezzar goes. He's going. And he calls into them and he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. It's dramatic change. Servants of the Most High God, come out. And they come out, and it says all of the important people, the government leaders and the king's counselors, gathered around to examine them and discovered that the fire hadn't so much as touched the 3 men. Not a hair was singed, not a scorch mark on their clothes, not even the smell of fire on them. And Nebuchadnezzar said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted him. They ignored the king's orders and laid their bodies on the line rather than serve or worship any god but their own. This is a dramatic reversal. The king who wanted everybody else to worship him is now saying, no, there is a God greater than me. And in verses 28 through 30 it says, therefore I issued this decree. Anyone anywhere of any race, color, or creed who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be, you ready for this? Ripped to pieces, limb from limb, and their houses torn down. I think once you've been ripped to pieces, limb from limb, you're not worried about the house. But there's never been a God who can pull off a rescue like this. Remember what he said before? What God is going to save you from my power? And now he's saying there's never been a God who can pull off a rescue like this. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. They got a promotion. They went from the fiery furnace to the corner office. It was a dramatic reversal. So do you know what the snail said as he rode on the back of a turtle? What the snail said as he rode on the back of the turtle? Whee! Here's what happens. We want God to move faster. Come on, God, faster, faster. Do it this way. Do it this way. Come on, move it up, speed it up. Do it now or do it here. Do it like this. We have all these things that we want God to do. Come on, God, let's go. I've got this exactly figured out the way it needs to be. God's ways and God's ideas and God's thought and God's timing are not our own. He seems to move a lot slower than we do. But he's doing it at exactly the right time and the right way. And when we find ourselves in alignment with him, it's a thrilling ride. I can't express enough from my own personal experience how thrilling a ride it is when you understand I'm not in charge, God is, and that's okay. Because there's this beauty in it. And there's some lessons we learn that when we're in alignment with God, one of those lessons is this: we can rejoice when we suffer. It makes no sense. It's such a paradox, but we can rejoice when we suffer. It was the previous suffering that God used to prepare Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for that moment. We can rejoice when we suffer. We discover that when we're in alignment with God. Romans 5:3 says this, and we know that the testing of our faith produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint because God has poured out His Spirit into our hearts. What starts as something confusing and difficult, painful, God uses when we're faithful. It goes from suffering to perseverance to character to hope. So we can rejoice in our sufferings. The second thing that we find when we're in alignment with God is this: we should live remembering it's Jesus who saves us from the fire. Now, we're not going to get into an eternal conversation. Let's look at it temporally. We are living in a culture that has turned up the flames on our faith about 7 times. They're 7 times hotter than they've ever been. And I remember something, as I was preparing this message, I remember something that Peter said on the first day of the church. He's preaching to a large crowd, and this is what Peter said. He said this: save yourselves from a corrupt generation. Save yourselves from a corrupt generation. I love this. You have to understand what I mean by this. I love the people in this world more than I love the world. I love my friends. Whether they go to church or not, it doesn't matter what they believe. I love these people. I love people. But there's a point where I have to say, I have to be different. I have to be distinct. And Peter said, save yourselves from this corrupt generation. And here's the thing. Jesus has already done his part. Jesus has opened up opportunities for me to step away from this generation and live totally different. Jesus gave his body and blood on the cross for us. It's like he's thrown us a life preserver so that when we trust him, we put our faith in him, he'll draw us out of what we're experiencing. And we still live in it, but we're not of it. We're insulated, not isolated from the generation in which we live. It's Jesus. Jesus is our hope. Jesus and Jesus alone. It's not me, not you, not anything else we see. Our only hope is in Jesus. Jesus is the one who draws us out. What is my place here? Is it with the world or is it with Jesus? When I was growing up, my preacher, who was an amazing preacher, told this story about this mom who took her son to a concert of a world-famous pianist, Ignace Paderewski. I don't know if you've ever heard the name before, but she took him to the concert hoping that he would develop a love for playing the piano. And if you ever played the piano, it takes a while. It's not something you just immediately pick up. So she wanted him to grow in his passion and love for it, so she took him to a concert. And it was in this beautiful concert hall, and everybody had on their tuxedos, and the women had on their beautiful, elegant dresses, and the chandeliers were just ornate. It was a great setting. But that boy's focus was on that grand piano, that ebony grand piano sitting in the center of the stage. And the mother, she was distracted, or she was talking to the person next to her, and without realizing it, her son slipped away from his seat. And he made his way to the front of the stage, and he climbed up on stage, and he sat down at the piano bench, and he started playing chopsticks. And the crowd was like, all of a sudden, their focus is on the piano too. And they're like, whose son is that? Where are the parents? Get that boy down from there. What does he think he's doing? Now, in the backstage, Paderewski heard the commotion, and he looked out on stage. He quickly figured out what was going on, and he grabbed his coat without any introduction, and he goes out to stage, and he walks up behind the boy, and he places his arm around the boy, and he starts playing this beautiful counter melody to chopsticks. And all the while, he's whispering in this boy's ear, don't stop. Don't give up. Keep playing. Don't worry about the crowd. Keep going. In those moments when our life seems to be the messiest, you have a heavenly Father who is going to reach his arms around you, and he's going to say, don't stop. Don't give up. Keep going. Don't worry about the crowd around you. Just trust me. There's a passage in Proverbs, it's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Don't lean on your own understanding. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. Acknowledge him. Worship him. And he will make your paths straight. And when you do that, you'll see that God can be trusted again, again, and again. It might be a little different than what you think, but there's going to come a point where you say, thank you, God, for what you've done for me. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity we've had to look at this story, to look at your word. And Lord, I want to lift up the people to you right now that are going through a tough time. They're trying to struggle. They're in that tension between belief and doubt. And Lord, I thank you for the example of these three young men who are willing to go into the fire, even if things didn't turn out so well. Lord, the greatest opportunity we have is to love you, to be faithful to you, to serve you. And Lord, I pray that our hearts would be drawn to that. But Lord, there's no judgment here. We lift up those who are struggling. And Lord, help us all to see you clearly, because you want to move and work in ways that we would never imagine. But thank you for all you've done for us and will do for us, and the things you do for all of us in this room. And it's in Jesus' name we pray.